I think we got down and we were discussing chapter 5 when the bell rang last week, so we'll pick it up at number 6. But I just wonder if anybody has anything from last week you want to start back up with, any points of contention or discussion from last week's class? Nothing yet? All right. All right. What do you got, Preston? Cain and Abel. Yes.
Talk about there not offering a proper sacrifice, but that you can give your, your countenance or whatever back.
Right.
That particular thing about God, what God told you.
Mm-hmm.
One little thing in the future, give me a little insight on that. That's God telling you, speaking directly to you.
Right.
And you've done, you haven't done anything bad yet, but here's where we're at.
Right. Well, here it is, chapter 4 of Genesis, verse 6 and 7. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it." That's the one you're talking about? All right. So the choice is always there. And Lord willing, that's part of tonight's lesson. So we won't talk any more about that because I don't want you to learn that too soon. No, the choice is always there. Who we want to be, what we want to do. Do we want to choose to do right or choose something else? And there are a lot of something else's. And that's an important part because when you think about Genesis, we're thinking about the first initial contact that God has with mankind theoretically. The idea is that this is the first thing we're going to read about God, and these are the first things he wants us to know about him. In the beginning, he would say, "I created the heavens and the earth, and my spirit was moving on the surface of the waters." And from there, every detail of the creation and then of man and man's fall, all of that is there for us to see. And even this exchange that Preston brought up between God and Cain. God didn't say to Cain, "I know what you're going to do because I'm eternal, I'm outside of time, and so I'm going to punish you ahead of time." He said, "You've got the choice." And another thing I like to observe that's meant a lot to me and helped me is to realize that God had certain things put in the Bible. He didn't put everything in there, but he put this exchange between him and Cain in the scriptures so that I could read it 6,000 years later. And I'm reading this today, and it's the same thing today. There's no part of this text that says to me, "Oh, this is ancient stuff that doesn't apply today." This is as timeless as the day is long. And I still have the same choice to make as Cain had. Sin's crouching at the door. Its desire is for me. I have to master it. What has changed? What is different today? Anything? Nothing is different. Nothing is different.
In that context of that right there, we've talked about that they've been expelled from the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And God has done so because they didn't follow what he said. And now sin is entered the world, and death has entered into the world, and all of that. But yet God has not pushed them away and not communicated.
Right.
And then here we've got an instance of, you've seen, but yet if you do well, you see what I'm saying?
Right. And the sacrifices. You think about that. That was the point of contention between these boys. Excuse me. How they were relating to God through the practice of the religion that they had. And when I say religion, I'm simply talking about the practices they must have gotten from God as far as how to relate to him, how to approach him, because they were both offering sacrifices. Cain didn't come along and, "Hey, what are you doing there, Abel? Offering a sacrifice? Well, what's that all about?" No, they both offered sacrifices. The difference was Cain offered his by faith. That's what the Hebrew writer says. His sacrifice was offered by faith. How does faith come according to Romans 10:17? Faith comes by hearing the word of God. Now, if Scripture's consistent, and it seems to me like it always has been, Abel must have had a word from God on how to make his sacrifice. And if Cain didn't know that, he could have asked God in their exchange there, because God was saying to Cain, if you do well, in other words, you have the opportunity to do well. If he was ignorant, he could have got knowledge, but I don't think he was ignorant. I think he knew exactly what he was supposed to do, because when Peter comes along later and Jude, they mention Cain, and they mention Cain in a sense that Cain was worshiping according to his own will. He was doing what he wanted. Now, I know that's not the way it is today. There's not anybody in the world who's simply worshiping God the way they want to. Everybody, that was tongue-in-cheek, by the way. That was the Greek word's facetious, I think. But there's a lot of that going on still. And if you go back to Genesis 4, you can see that's not the way to do it. You don't worship God according to your desire. You worship God according to his explicit teachings, commands, examples, whatever he provides to give us to know that's the way to do it. So that's what we've got. They were offering sacrifices. Why? Sacrifices relate to sin. These boys had to have a knowledge of that, and that's what was going on. I believe. All right. Number 6 on the worksheet. About whom, by the way, Phyllis, did you ever get, you did, she's got one in her hand. About whom are we told following the account of Cain's punishment? And this is right at the end of chapter 4. A fellow by the name of Lamech. And we'll talk about some more of this in a little bit. But Lamech took to himself, it says in verse 19, 2 wives. Name of the one was Ada. Name of the other, Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and the harp, which might give some, or lyre and the pipe, rather. You ever heard of a jubilee? Now, later on in the law, God will incorporate a jubilee year, but I remember when I was a kid, my mom would turn on the TV and going through the channels sometimes there would, because she was looking for the gospel quartets on Sunday morning. And there was always one show called the Gospel Jubilee. And so it goes right on back to this guy's name here in Genesis chapter 4. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So we're getting some detailed information about this man's family and about what their offspring began doing in the earth. Forging of iron, the keeping of flocks, the playing of music, all that's right there in Genesis chapter 4. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me. There's no account of what happened except Lamech's words. Somebody wounded me, so I killed him. A boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, Lamech 77-fold. Why in the world is this in the Bible? And I'd like, again, one more verse for God to say, now, Marty, this is why I wrote this in here. But God leaves it to us to make some conclusions about why this is here, to give some thought to this. Why did he put this text in here about Lamech and his family and his attitude toward this young boy, apparently, who might have been considered a young man because he says man in the first passage and then a boy in the second. What in the world is this all about? What's going to happen by the time we get to chapter 6? The flood. Why the flood? Why did God send the flood? Mankind had become so violent. Violence is mentioned twice in chapter 6. And remember, I made the point last week, I believe, that we're not just looking at biographies, if you will, of people, of individuals. We're in a sense, very real sense, looking at a biography of the earth. And I wouldn't say that if God did not personify the earth with regard to sin. And he does that in Romans chapter 8. If you want to hold on to chapter 4, keep a finger there or a marker of some kind and go over to Romans chapter 8. I mentioned this last week, but I failed to have us just go there and read it together. But I think it's well worth taking the time to do that. This is Paul writing in Romans 8 at verse 18. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed in us, or to us. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. And I'm wondering, what does he include in this idea of the creation? Because he's talked about the sufferings that humanity undergoes in verse 18, it seems, but then he mentions the creation. Verse 20, the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, that the creation itself also will be set free from the slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. Now, what did God say about the creation when he completed everything? It's very good. There was no corruption in the initial creation. But Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, sin entered, that's where the corruption entered, and God was willing to subject the creation to that kind of downfall. He was willing to let that happen. And this is what Paul is writing about. We know, verse 22, that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. Isn't that an interesting way to put it? The whole creation groans and it suffers the pains of childbirth. What did God tell Eve was be part of her punishment after eating the forbidden fruit? Pain in childbirth would be increased. So perhaps there was some initial pain by God's design for the first children, but after that, which also to me implies that she'd already had some kids, and she knew that childbirth didn't hurt that much. Why would it make sense if she hadn't had any children by the time the curse was pronounced on her? But it was pronounced, in my estimation, implying that she'd already had some kids, and who knows how many. But what did Cain do when he went out, when God put a mark on him and sent him out into the earth? By the way, why did God put a mark on him? So nobody would kill him. Well, who else was there? See, with our Western minds, we think, well, we've only read about Cain and Abel. Those are the only people that were there. And now Abel's gone, so who else was there? No, there were plenty of other people, evidently, on the earth, because he goes out, he marries a woman, he founds a city. Here's one of his offspring, Lamech, and where's he getting his wife? All these people were marrying the offspring of their parents, or original parents, Adam and Eve. Now, today, genetically, you can't do that. Well, that would answer a lot of questions, wouldn't it? But initially, genetics were a whole lot cleaner and purer than they are now. And if you go online, there are some guys who talk about this in YouTube videos. They're geneticists, and they have a Christian background, and they say, what's happening to the human race is that the more we procreate in our fallen circumstance, the more junk is getting into our procreation cycles. And so there's more stuff happening to people that didn't initially happen. People were certainly, almost certainly, I would say, strong and vigorous at the beginning. But ever since the fall, that's been gradually changing and going downhill. And maybe that was built into it so that God would know at a certain time it's not only time to come back because of sin, but it's time to come back because mankind is not. They're at their. It's like when you buy a car. How many miles do you expect to get out of a car? I'm going to squeeze just as many miles out of that thing as I'm going to have to push it to the junkyard when I'm done with it. Well, that's just kind of the way it is. We think other people buy a car, well, I'm going to get another one next year, and then another one after that, because they like to keep new cars, and that's fine, but somebody's going to have that car somewhere, and it's going to last a certain amount of time. And we have a general understanding of how long a car will last. Well, I think God knows that about his creation. It doesn't say all that, but yes.
Who's to say that God didn't create other people besides Adam and Eve? It doesn't say that he did,
Right.
but it's very possible that he could have done that. He could have put other people on other planets, for all we know. And one person went to the land of Nod for a wife. And I don't remember that it was Cain.
Right.
And married the daughters of men.
Right.
So there were people there. I don't know exactly how they got there, but I've always thought it's quite possible that he could have created other people because of those two circumstances. But
There are situations, I'm sorry?
Didn't it say though that God created man and then later he created Adam?
Oh, no, it says man was the first one, the initial one. And when Paul gets to Romans, here, staying also in Romans chapter 12. Yes, that's what Adam called his wife, was Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Let's see. I'm in the right. Oh, it's chapter 5. I'm sorry, Romans 5. Must be verse 12. Yes. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sin. Death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned in the likeness of the offense of Adam, who was a type of him who was to come. Well, that doesn't say it like Acts. Let's go to Acts chapter 17. Let's take a look here. This is where Paul's preaching up on Mars Hill, and he says this. Verse 25, we'll start at Acts 17:25. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. So Paul pretty much seals it here that everybody who exists was made from that one. And even if there might have been others, who are we left with after the flood? We're left with the 8 that were the family of Noah and his wife, boys and their wives. So I don't believe there was any other creation of humanity other than that of Adam and Eve. Now, if we go to chapter 5 of Genesis, and here's another thing, I wish there was more explanation, but it's like God said, you don't need to know all that stuff, Marty. I'm going to give you enough that you can figure it out, but you need to go on from there, son. Genesis chapter 5. Well, actually, look at chapter 4, verse 25. And this is after Cain kills Abel. So it says, Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, for she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh, and then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. But look at verse 3 of chapter 5. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him, what did he name him? So how old was Adam when he had Seth? So how many children could you have in 130 years? And how many children could those children have? And if God tells them initially, be fruitful and multiply, and if there's no pain in childbirth, because, you talk to a lot of ladies today, hey, how many more kids you going to have? So I'm done. Man, I ain't going through that again. Oh, boy. Well, initially, there apparently wasn't any pain connected to it, and that's why that was part of the curse. So Eve's just popping them out left and right, I imagine. I don't know. But I know that by the time Cain was, I don't know, it's not a very gracious way to put it, is it? But by the time Cain had a mark put on him and he was sent out, there were people out there for him to find from whom he could choose a wife. She had to be a sister, at least a cousin. She had to be some kind of relation to him, and there were enough people that he could establish what would be referred to as a city. You don't build a city with 6 or 12 people. You got to have a pretty good group of people. And there was Lamech. Well, who hurt Lamech? A boy. Not a named person, but a boy. And he says, the boy hurt me, so I killed him. And by the way, if Cain is going to be avenged 7 times, I'm going to be avenged how many times? 770 times. So I'm anticipating the possibility of more violence from other people. There were other people. One guy, I think it was Johnny Ramsey, somebody asked him, where did Cain get his wife? And he said, well, from his father-in-law's house. And it was like, okay, well, that makes sense to me. But it's a question that the context gives rise to, because we tend to think of things the way they are today, but things were different then. This was the beginning, if you will. Don?
Genesis 3:20 in a second, and just reiterating what Harold said. When we read Genesis, we see this picture, and we're always seeing. We develop this picture as we're reading these stories.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not seeing all these other people.
Right.
It's inferring that there are these other people, like you said. They're having kids during all this time. He's just not telling that story.
Right.
But in Genesis, right after they sinned, in Genesis 3:20, as Harold was saying, it says, now the man called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all the living.
Right.
He didn't create other people because they would be living, and then she wasn't their mother. So that would refute that he just created other people.
And he's letting us know that that's what Adam called her right after they're making their way out of the garden, never to come back to it. So there's a lot of stuff in here that gives us the information we're looking for, if we're looking for it. But it's almost as if God didn't want to lead us into that. He just allowed that if you come back to this and you've got these questions, I'm going to give you this information so you can search it out and get some answers for yourself. But it's not necessarily something that, I mean, if you're writing this for people's salvation, to reach their souls and their heart, the details of such things as this might not be that important. Later on, it becomes important because we know we're looking at this book and we're wanting to make sure that our faith is sound and secure, and that we're trusting a document. We're trusting God because of this document, and we want to know that the document makes sense and everything about it is kosher, if you will. Don?
Corinthians 3:10 through 15 talks about there's nothing you lay your foundation, which is Jesus Christ. There's no other foundation but Jesus Christ. Now we can build wood, hay, or straw, and we can build falsehoods on top of our foundation. We can build silver and gold and precious stones, which will hold in the fire when we're tested with fire. If that precious stone's held, those foundations on Jesus Christ, we'll receive a reward. If we build wood, hay, or straw,
right,
it's going to get burned up and we'll suffer loss. So we want to build truths on the foundation of Jesus Christ, which there's no other foundation.
Right.
We're saved, but we want to build truths on top of that.
And Jesus Christ came back to these original truths. Remember in Matthew 19 when he was asked a question about marriage, can you divorce and marry anybody you want? And what did Jesus go back to immediately at that point? He said, have you not read that he who made them when? In the beginning made them how? Male and female. Boy, that answers a lot of questions going on in today's society, doesn't it? God made them in the beginning, and he made them male and female. So all of these, to me, they direct us to the idea that Adam and Eve were the first ones, and that they procreated just as he told them to. He said, be fruitful and multiply. Seth wasn't born until 130 years into Adam's life, and so they had time. So exactly what day did they commit the sin? How many years after creation? That information's not in here. We just know it was within that 130-year time span because, well, he was 130 years old, and if the gestation period was 9 months then, like it is now, well, that just backs you up a little bit. And it's like the old joke. We know that Adam was created on the 6th day, but what time of day was Adam created? Anybody remember that? It was just a little before Eve. Okay. All right. Now, I know I think it's funny, but it doesn't really answer any questions. However, when you go back and you read, what did God do with Adam after he created him? To let him know that he needed Eve. He brought all the animals in, and Adam named all the animals. Now, that had to happen on the sixth day because that's when Adam was created. And Eve was created because the creation account ends with Eve being present. God made them male and female, and that's when he pronounced everything was very good. So he must have named all those. So probably Adam was created pretty early on that day to get all that stuff in. And they didn't even stop for meals according to the text. I don't know. There's probably plenty of stuff to just reach and grab and eat, and I imagine it was really good too. Could you imagine what things might have tasted like in the garden? I mean, you go to the store and you get fruit today, and it's a toss-up whether it's going to be tasty or not when you get it home. And you can do all the great things you can to get a good watermelon, and I've had pretty good, all the 4 indicators, but still sometimes you'll get one home and it's no. And you can't blame the store because they don't know. They don't have a, what am I getting off on this for? That's pointless. Anyway, so, but did I miss a hand? Somebody have a hand? Oh, Preston.
I do have whenever God set things in motion, it's living by the sweat of your brow, and woman's desire should be for her man. I think about that, in that when God set that in motion, that's the way things are. But I wonder, it's kind of like being in the garden, what it would have been like, or could have lived forever, for people not knowing God, you know. But I think about that, and I think, was woman equal with man at that point in time, and then he put her in subjection to man? And then man says, you know, look, this woman that you gave me, so he just solved that problem. It's problem solving. She'll be in subjection to you now. Her desire shall be for you. Were they equal at that time? You know, I think about things like that, trying to understand, you know, and well, it's like you said, how important is that? It's just there for you to ponder and to problem solve and keep your mind busy and to study God's word. I don't know that I need to worry about it that much. You see what I'm saying?
Well, it's something that Paul mentioned when he wrote to Timothy. And if you go to, let's see, is it 1 Timothy? I think it's 1 Timothy. This is what he had to say. Excuse me. Well, first I got to find it. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one here. Chapter 2. 1 Timothy chapter 2. He says this in verse 11, a woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness, but I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. Well, why is that, Paul? Are you a male chauvinist? Is that what this is all about? He says this, for it was Adam who was first created. Now, that's what he mentions first. God created Adam first, and he said it's not good for the man to be alone. He needs a helper. Yes. Yes. It's just like you've got a bolt, and you've got to turn that bolt either to tighten it or to loosen it. What do you need? You need a screwdriver and a hammer, because you can put the edge of that screwdriver against the edge of that bolt, and you can tap it around with a hammer. And it'll take you all day, but it'll get it done. Is that what you need? No. Well, I'm the nut, I guess. But what you need is a wrench. And when you get a wrench in your hand, you put it on, it fits. Well, I'm sorry, ladies, you probably haven't done much of this stuff, but it's just such a good feeling when you reach, I'm not sure if that's the right tool, because now, it used to be it was simple. Everything was standard. You had, and then they threw metrics at us. Now I got to have different metric tools in my bag, and you put that wrench on the nut, and when it fits, it's like, oh, thank you, Lord. Well, now that's the tool meant for that, and that's what woman is. She's the perfect accompaniment to man. So initially, the idea was, here's man, he needs a helper, and when you give somebody a helper, the helper's not meant to become the boss. The helper's meant to be the helper. That was the original plan. But now things are changing because of sin, and God includes that, as Preston's talking about here, in part of the curse. Now, your desire will be to the man. There's something about the new relationship that's not what it initially was, and it's not good because it's part of the curse. So, ladies, that's another thing to look forward to on Judgment Day. When the Lord returns, whatever negative thing this brings about the relationship of men and women, it's going to be released. It's going to be gone. So there was a sense of subjection, I think, initially because of the creation, but not based on sin. It was just based on design. But now there's a sense of subjection because I say there was a sense of subjection initially in the idea that she was brought to the man's helper. So he's supposed to do the stuff and she's supposed to help him. However, he needed help to get that stuff done. But because of sin, there's an extra added element of this subjection. And her desire will be to him.
He's making a comparison here in verse 10 because that was written because of false teachers. And the women, if you go on and read 17, you will figure out that the women had been taught by the false teachers and they were going around teaching everybody the false teaching. And it was
Okay.
the solution to that particular problem.
Okay.
To tell those women to stay home and take care of their families and stuff.
Stop her interfering.
Spreading false teaching.
Right.
So he's saying that these women were deceived, just like Eve was deceived.
Right. And if you look through history, I mean, we've got this passage. There's another passage in 1 Corinthians that talks about this relationship between men and women, especially in worship. But if you look through history, God has always chosen men for the leadership positions. It's not because he's down on women. It's because that's not what he created women for. Priests. How many women were priests? How many women of the tribe of Levi were given the job of taking care of the tabernacle? How many female prophets were there? There were some, weren't there? Yes. Deborah was one. Anna was another one at the temple when Jesus was brought. Huldah is a third one. But you got to kind of think hard to remember the female prophetesses. And how prominently did they figure? Well, Deborah probably more than the others, but if you look at the context, the historical context, she was working in a time when the men would not step up to the plate. Who was she commissioned to go find to send against the Midianites? Barak. What did Barak say? Well, I'm not going unless you go with me. That was not the way God planned it to be. God planned for men to stand up and be men and have a backbone and be strong and follow through with what he told them to do. And the woman's going to be there to help him. She's going to be backing him up all the way. But now men aren't doing that. And it's like God says, all right, here's a righteous woman. Here's a God-fear. She fears me. I'll make her the prophetess. She'll be the judge in Israel. But it's out of the ordinary. It's not typical. It's atypical.
You also have to be careful when you go down this path because when I was teaching in Korea at the university, they sent a guy to me who was working on a master's in theology because they wanted me to help him.
Right.
Because he came from Myanmar and he was so down on women that he thought women didn't deserve an education, women couldn't even talk to their husbands, women were basically ignorant, and it was coming out in what he was writing.
Right.
I think they kind of sent him to me for me to help him because they were trying to prove to him. I mean, I showed him the scriptures, but I think they were trying to prove to him that women are not completely ignorant.
Right.
And that we do have brains.
And Paul is the one who's,
You have to be careful.
yes. This idea of women are second-class citizens or second-rate citizens or second-rate Christians or whatever, that was never God. Even after the curse, that's not God's intention. It's just that I designed men, if I were speaking in God's place, I would think he would say, I designed men to be leaders, to do this. That's what I want them to do. I designed the woman to help the man to do this. That's the pattern from creation, even before sin entered the picture. And now that sin entered the picture, we've got what Paul's saying here. I want the men to take prominence because man was created first, But man was not deceived in the eating of the fruit. That was Eve who was deceived in the eating of the fruit. So there's an implication there too about, well, then why did Adam eat the fruit after Eve if he wasn't deceived, if he knew he was doing wrong? There's an unanswered question there, but the Holy Spirit is having Paul to write this down in a way that looks more favorably at Adam than it does on Eve, because she was the one who started that mess, so to speak. And who took leadership with the fruit? I don't know that that's what was in Eve's mind, but she led the way, and that's what Paul is bringing out here. She wasn't supposed to be the leader. He was supposed to be the leader, and she led the way. So he comes along, and he eats as well. And then when Jesus comes along, how many apostles did he have? He had 12 initially. One of them fell. So in choosing the 12, and how many things did Jesus change? He radically changed everything. There was not going to be any more sacrificial system in Jesus' plan, except for him. Not going to be any more temple in Jesus' plan, except for us. All these things that changed, and yet this initial plan of creation did not change. Men were supposed to take the lead. Apostles, they were all men. When Judas, that's the guy's name, Judas. Thank you, Sue. When Judas betrayed him, he didn't say, all right, we're going to change things up here, guys. I've changed so many other things. I'm going to change this too. We're going to get a woman to take his place. He didn't do that. Who are the elders supposed to be? Supposed to be men. But what's the first qualification? They got to be married men. Why? Well, because it's not good for a man to be alone if he's leading my people. He needs to have a helper suitable for him. I could see God saying this. It's all just right there. There are the individual passages, but there's also every practice of God has come back to this original plan of male leadership. Not because women are inferior, it's because this is the design. God wants men to lead. Now we're looking at Genesis, and it's brought us up to today, and it's going to do this every single time we look at Genesis. It's going to bring us up to today. There's nothing in the book that's out of date or out of touch with what's happening in the world or in the church today. I can't believe that's the first bell. I really thought, man, I got to have another worksheet. My computer's been goofing up, so I don't have another worksheet because I thought we would zip through this one so fast. I think we've only gotten one done so far. That's okay. I'm not upset. I'm just surprised that, all right. And you're probably thinking, we're never going to get done. We're never going to get done. Well, we'll get done. Excuse me. All right. Anybody got anything? In the next couple of minutes, let's just look at number 7 so you can be thinking about it. What's chapter 5 an account of? We've already looked at chapter 5 to see about when Adam and Eve had Seth. 130 years old was Adam when Seth became their son. So that's there. It's a genealogy. That's what chapter 5 is. Note some of the things I have there on that first arrowed bullet of the ages when these men became fathers. Or note some of the ages when these men became fathers. Well, Adam, how old? Now remember, he didn't become a father in 130 years, but it's saying that when he was 130 years old, they had Seth. We know because of what's written before that he already had at least 2 boys, probably had a whole bunch of other kids. But Seth is pointed out. Why is Seth pointed out? Because Seth is the one who's going to be the focus of the lineage now from this point on. That's why Seth is pointed out. What is said consistently about the life ages of these men? And if you go to verse 8, you'll see it. Verse 11, you'll see it. Verse 14, you'll see it. Verse 17, verse 20. What it says is, this is how old this guy was, and then he died. And this is how old this guy was, and then he died. This is how old this guy was, and then he died. But who breaks that chain? With whom does the chain break? It breaks with Enoch. When it gets down to Enoch, what does it say? He was not, because he walked with the Lord and the Lord took him. Wow. That's a commentary to me. So we got all these guys, and it just says of them, without giving any explanation, this is how old they were, and then they died. This is how old this guy was, and then he died. But Enoch, he walked with the Lord. You think Enoch was the standout? I think Enoch was the standout. So we're sort of getting, I think, a little bit of side information with this, that not that many men walked with the Lord. Not that many had a really close relationship with him. And if you pressed me on it, I'd have to say, well, I don't have scripture to necessarily back that up. It just seems to me the way the text is shaping up. And we know what we're coming to in chapter 6. We're coming to the flood. We've already heard from Lamech. What did Lamech say? This kid hurt me, so I killed him. And if Cain is going to be avenged 7 times, I'm going to be avenged how many times? 7 times 70. Why are we told that? I think it's because God's giving us an idea of what things we're leading up to, and when he comes to chapter 6, he's going to have to say that the world was so violent, I'm going to have to wipe everybody out. But who did he not wipe out? The one guy. The one guy, probably somewhat like Enoch, walking with God, a righteous man. So he saved him. Well, that's probably as far as we need to go